I'm the Senior Advocate for Women and Girls at Refugees International, which is an independent policy and advocacy organization in Washington, D.C. that is exclusively focused, and the only one in the world exclusively focused on advocating for the rights and needs and well-being of forcibly displaced people. So we have a big job and we are a small group. Again, my expertise lies in gender issues amongst displaced people. But before I get started on some of this, I wanted to just acknowledge how wonderful this summit is, because I think that, I was trying to figure out how do I fit into this. And I fit into it for various reasons, and my work does, and this topic does. But I do think that it's been clear over the last few sessions that being in tune with oneself, focusing on wellness, focusing on understanding both your communities, yourself, the world, that by doing so and doing that work, you are definitely in tune with a variety of things. And I just will say that I think Valerie and others, Elizabeth, Ann, and others who have organized this event are really clearly in tune, because, I am benefiting from this summit as much as anyone. I'm not the friend, if you guys were in the last session or a couple sessions ago, I'm not the friend I mentioned that's obsessed with work, but I am similar to her, which is probably why we're friends. But that being said, I think these principles that we're talking about are important for anyone working on social justice issues, and certainly myself and my team. But what I wanted to talk about, again, what I was brought in for, was to talk about what's going on in Afghanistan, because I think, it's certainly dominated the news, as it well should. And honestly, I have focused my entire career on being very close to and involved with issues of both forced displacement, but also conflict. So again, a lot of this talk about happiness and well-being is clearly important, and it's important because for people like myself, but also people going through very traumatic times, which is what I, not only focus on, but surround myself with all the time. So that being said, I think in all my years of working on conflict and living and working in Syria and Somalia and all these difficult places, I think Afghanistan is as dramatic of a situation that we've ever seen in quite a while, and especially as it relates to women and girls. And by that, I mean that women and girls were making advances and had expectations and had hopes and dreams, and were really, bettering themselves, but also being, in a very difficult and fraught way, were really involving themselves and pushing forward in being involved in public life. And as we know, the private life is important, but also public life and being engaged in part of your community and your broader government and world is very important. But anyway, so the point is women and girls were doing so and making some very big strides. And when I say it's as dramatic of a situation as anyone I've seen, for women and girls and gender equality, it is as dramatic as anything I've seen, because within the space of a week, really, there were huge backslides for women and girls. And not only huge backslides in their rights, but also in their expectations. There's, a huge grieving process for women and girls that have been working on these topics and empowerment and education and all these different topics for some 20 years, many of them, and a grieving process, because those who have been evacuated are in a better situation, but they've left a lot of people behind, and they've left their country within days, and they've left their work in some ways, they've left what they've been working towards. So I say that, and I just start with saying that, that it's dramatic, it's traumatic for both women and girls there, but also those who have left, and then also those like myself working on these issues. So just really quickly, I work on policy and advocacy, and in terms of that, I did write a report recently that got published a week or two ago. We publish at Refugees International, we published our own work, and then it's picked up by, news, and we send it to policymakers, and we have meetings and try to really change things at a broader level. And so, a couple of the points that I made in the report that I think are important is there was a lot of attention and focus on getting people out of Afghanistan, and we can debate another time the engagement of the US and other actors in Afghanistan, the departure. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about that, but that's not really the point at this moment. The point is that we, and I say we by the US and others, have used the human rights of women and girls in Afghanistan as a way to be, as a reason to be there, and then we've left. And we got left a lot of women and girls with expectations that are dashed very quickly, and I think that that also, in terms of policy, means that we have a responsibility to them. So my two kind of takeaways in this report that I really highlight, and that I will say I'm meeting with high-level delegations and UN people and all these, people that are making decisions about these issues. So I'm meeting with them now. That is the point of my work. My work is not to write a report and put it out there and, speak on various news channels, but rather to have that lead to policy changes. And the two pieces that this report really highlights is that we collectively, and the how is the hard part of my work and figuring that out. But initially speaking, the two principles that we really need to focus on, I think, that are being overlooked, are ensuring that Afghan women and girls can get out of Afghanistan if they so choose and want to and need to and are persecuted and being targeted, of which they are being targeted. I mean, I could tell you lots of stories about pretty horrific things, but and then number two, ensure that the humanitarian response within Afghanistan is gender sensitive. And by that, I mean that it's getting to women. And right now it's not, for a lot of reasons, including the fact that the Taliban won't allow women to work as frontline responders. So, accessing women becomes difficult. But those are the two kind of big takeaways. And those are the things that are not being addressed because they're a bit longer term. The ensuring that women and girls can get out of Afghanistan is challenging because, again, when it comes to these topics or these conflicts or these huge kind of social issues and conflicts that we are all trying to address in whatever way we can, even the experts, sorry about the light, by the way. I'm trying to be in a good light because I'm in a morning situation where I am. But anyway, even the experts, can have really good intentions, but when it comes to implementation, it can be difficult. And by that, I mean, people are not even recognizing and understanding that 80% of women in rural Afghanistan don't have identification documents, that it wasn't until 2020 that women's names were allowed to be on their own children's birth certificates. So, I mean, I find that remarkable and remarkably, problematic. And that was with the previous government. So just to say that, there's a lot of things that we want to have happen, but a lot of times it's in the weeds to figure out how does that happen? How do women and girls travel through Afghanistan, especially if they're a female-headed household alone, when they're not allowed to, and then they don't have identification documents, to get into closed countries next door, to then be resettled, to then, I mean, it's, some of these things are quite difficult. So I, again, spend my time highlighting the big picture issues and making some big picture recommendations, and then meeting with the people who make the decisions to say, this needs to happen and this is how it can happen. And so that is what I do. But I could give you a lot more information on the topic at hand that I'm talking about. And the title of this session is Supporting Girls and Women in Afghanistan, Injecting Feminism to the Policy Discussion. And that is what I do every day, is inject feminism. And by feminism, I also just mean inject the realities for women, the realities for women in Afghanistan are that, again, they don't have IDs, and there's a lot of restrictions, and they're not getting humanitarian assistance because women are not allowed to work to give them the humanitarian assistance. So those are all the challenges. But what I wanted to say kind of towards the end of this is a couple things. One, as it relates to this conference and this summit, one of the things that's really coming away, and I'm taking away from the other sessions as well, is that the decisions we make as individuals, the decisions we make as communities, the decisions we make as countries and governments and militaries and policymakers have vast effects on other people. We know that. I'm just, the interconnectedness of what we do and how we do it, I think, is coming out clear to me. And honestly, I've never really had the opportunity to talk about my work in a context like this. It's often, it's usually in very similar circumstances of policy discussions and think tanks, and these things, these places where people are not thinking about well-being, and they're not thinking about happiness, and they're not thinking about balance. And so I think that putting these crises that we're facing in the world, putting these crises that we are both affected by, and then others that we are not so affected by. I mean, we, and as individuals, few of us, unless I don't know who's in the audience, but are affected by the situation in Afghanistan the way the women and girls, of course, who remain in Afghanistan are. But I think that just as in our own bodies, if something's off, it affects the rest of us. Mm-hmm. I think globally, if something's off, if there are women and girls in a country, 25 million of which are repressed in the ways that they are right now in 2021, that affects all of us. So,
Devon, I'm just going to jump in because I love what you're saying, and you're giving us a perspective because you know so well, and because you mentioned some of the circumstances, and you speak to policy, and you speak to governments, and you speak to agencies. And this is, I know, an unusual circumstance for you to be part of this, but I think we'd love to know, if you can help, how we can affect some change on some level individually.
Sure. Well, I think first of all, the gentleman from Bhutan was really particularly important in what he was saying, and that is, on a broader level, first of all, to not get into these situations. And that's not an individual thing that we can do, but it is going forward, again, being part of the solutions to not be competitive, not be militaristically dominant, not all of these things. But now that we are in this situation, especially for Afghanistan specifically, you can do a lot of things. One, every single one of you in whatever country you're in, there are Afghans going everywhere. There are Afghans in Albania. There are Afghans in Italy. There are Afghans being resettled to the US. They're going to Germany. They're going to South America. And so I think that being part of the public awareness, number one, but also the public welcoming, kind of, to say that, and there's a variety of ways you can do that. In the US, there's a lot of ways, and I'll link those in the chat as we're finishing this session. Also, more broadly, there are organizations that are working on the ground in Afghanistan, that are continuing to work on the ground in Afghanistan. And honestly, the biggest challenge right now, immediately, is a humanitarian situation. For those of you who have been to Afghanistan, you'll know it is a deadly winter. I mean, they have really rough winters, and the fact that they have half the population in need of food, and then they have the issues of winter and snow and access, and people freezing to death already. So I think that supporting more broadly Afghans being resettled or relocated is number one. And number two, supporting these organizations that are providing the services within Afghanistan, and especially because, a lot of the diplomatic relationships are not there right now. And also, to be quite honest, we are trying to support Afghan people and get aid to Afghan people without having to go through the Taliban. which requires these organizations and agencies to be very creative, but also, they need money. So it's about money, but it's also about public support. And so I will put some, while people are asking questions, I'll put some organizations in the chat. I want to be clear that my organization, Refugees International, doesn't provide direct services to refugees. We are strictly a policy organization. So we like to link people up with organizations that are really providing the services. And then finally, I think encouraging, as individuals, I think whether it be Afghanistan or other places, I think encouraging and being part of, again, on a gender lens, encouraging women to be involved in these processes. I just met at the UN in New York with the first, Afghan woman governor, the first Afghan woman parliamentarian, a group of women that have all been evacuated. And they said, we were asking them, we said, okay, this organization is having these meetings that are about the future of Afghanistan. These organizations are having really high level meetings about this and this and this and this. And we said, how many have you been invited to? Which ones are you participating in? And they said, none. We've never been invited. So I think that ensuring that, that people, Afghan women are represented, but also, again, I think it's a bigger issue. We're talking about Afghanistan, but I just think it's this summit has been about bigger, broader, and individual, balance and actions. And I think that one of those actions is to, in each of your own circles, whatever it may be, really going the extra mile to be inclusive, and really going the extra mile to think, what are the barriers for people being involved in my world of expertise, or my topic or my issue. And by that, I mean, I think it's important because, again, I go back to even the IDs of Afghan women. We operate on a very, our world operates on, with nation states and borders and paperwork. And, that is how we operate between each other. And I think, first of all, that's a problem. But I think if that's what it really is, and that's how we operate and we interact with one another, we have to think about the barriers by which people can't interact and can't access safety and can't feel whole, which is what we're really working towards, I think, in this summit. So